Hey, what's up? It's Connor. WWDC 23 just passed about a week ago, and wow, what an event. We got so many incredible announcements like Vision Pro, which is Apple's AR/VR headset, but we also got a couple of Macs, and the one product that actually stuck out to me and excited me the most was the M2 Ultra Mac Studio. Apple went ahead and announced 3 new Macs, which is pretty crazy because WWDC is supposed to be a software-focused event, but it seemed like the main focus was actually hardware. Apple gave us a 15-inch MacBook Air, the M2 Mac Studio, and then one that a lot of people have been waiting on, the Mac Pro. So the Mac Pro is the last Mac that Apple was selling that shipped with an Intel processor, and now that we've switched it over to Apple Silicon, the full transition is complete. But the whole point of the Mac Pro is to have some sort of upgradability and expansion, which isn't the most possible thing because Apple is now with Apple Silicon and it's all system on a chip. But the way Apple did this was basically just leave a bunch of PCIe slots open, so you can't upgrade the CPU or the GPU or even the RAM, but you can upgrade the storage or add a bunch of cards such as video, network, or audio. The most interesting part about the Mac Pro to me though was the fact that it's shipping with the exact same chip that's in this Mac Studio. So that's exactly why I went out and picked up an M2 Ultra Mac Studio, because it's basically like owning a Mac Pro. Last year we got introduced to the M1 Ultra chip and then of course the Mac Studio itself, which shipped with an M1 Max or M1 Ultra. And this has now been upgraded to either be shipped with an M2 Max or an M2 Ultra. And the M2 Ultra chip comes from Apple taking 2 M2 Max chips and stitching them together, essentially just doubling the performance from what we find on the M2 Max Silicon. The spec that I've gone with is the first option or baseline Ultra configuration with the 24-core CPU, 60-core GPU, 32-core neural engine, 64 gigabytes of unified memory, and a 1TB SSD. The M2 Ultra does give us improvements to the CPU and GPU core count, which is not something that I think most people are going to notice in a day-to-day experience. What I do think people will notice is how the M2 does have improved individual cores. So each individual core within the chip is more powerful, which should result in much more noticeable improvements in opening apps and the responsiveness within those apps, and just making the overall experience very fast, smooth, and snappy. We see a 3.3 times faster CPU performance, 6.1 times faster GPU performance, and up to 5.9 times faster machine learning. And then within certain applications, we get a 5 times faster rendering performance in Final Cut Pro, 2.7 times faster performance within DaVinci Resolve, and 6.1 times faster when it comes to 3D rendering. The tasks that I mainly use that require some performance are things such as video editing, photo editing, and some graphic design work, and this machine has been incredible and I've yet to notice one hiccup or slowdown, which is kind of what I expected because I was using the M1 Ultra before, and that thing handled my workflow just fine. But like I said before, the M2 does bring little improvements to the overall responsiveness within apps, which is something that I happen to notice right away, like going through menus and sub-menus just seems to be ever so slightly quicker. The Mac Studio itself shares the same sort of idea that the Mac Mini and Mac Pro have, which is just a simple silver box with a power cord, and you gotta bring everything yourself. But this is where the Mac Studio really shines though, and that is within the port selection. On the back, we have 4 Thunderbolt 4 ports, 2 USB-A ports, 1 HDMI port, 1 10 gigabit Ethernet port, and a 3.5mm headphone jack. And then around on the front, we also have 2 more Thunderbolt 4 ports and an SD card slot. And speaking of that SD card slot, the Mac Pro actually doesn't have an SD card slot, so the most powerful and most expensive Mac in Apple's lineup doesn't even ship with an SD card slot. Earlier this year, we did get a new Mac Mini as well as MacBook Pro, which both shipped with upgraded connectivity such as Wi-Fi 6E as well as Bluetooth 5.3, and most importantly, HDMI 2.1. And now with the Mac Studio being upgraded to the M2 architecture, we also received those same upgrades, but because this is a desktop Mac, that HDMI 2.1 port is incredibly important and valuable. In total, the Ultra can support 8 displays at 4K 60Hz, or 6 displays at 6K at 60Hz, or 3 displays with up to an 8K resolution at 60Hz. And with that HDMI 2.1 port, you can get support for an 8K at 60Hz display or 4K resolution at up to 240Hz with support for variable refresh rate. This upgrade alone makes the Mac Studio the perfect option for desktop use, as you can now go ahead and purchase almost any display that you want, and you'll be able to take a full advantage of what that display is capable of. So whether it's a high resolution at 8K, or what I think is a lot more interesting, which is 4K resolution at a higher refresh rate of up to 240 Hz, as well as getting support for Pro Motion, which can dynamically change the refresh rate to match whatever you have on screen. Now, some of you may already know I'm using the LG 42C2 OLED as my main desktop display, and that can support a 4K resolution at up to 120 Hz, so I can now take full advantage of my display quality with this new Mac Studio, which makes upgrading over the M1 version that much more worth it. Bluetooth 5.3 as well as Wi-Fi 6E are also major updates because you now get better Wi-Fi performance, which personally I won't really notice because I actually use the Ethernet port to connect to my router. But Bluetooth 5.3 is a huge update because you now get more reliability as well as longer range with things like Bluetooth headphones, mouse and keyboard, and really any sort of Bluetooth peripheral that you plan on pairing with this machine. Overall, I'm extremely excited to now be using this Mac Studio because I had zero issues with the previous model besides that HDMI port, and now that we have 2.1, there really is nothing that's going to beat this computer for the next couple of years. And speaking of the next couple of years, I'm super excited to see how far I can take this machine. I already know that I'm going to be using this for many years to come because there's so much power and performance under the hood, and it feels like any sort of peripheral I pair with this should be able to take full advantage of the power within the M2 Ultra. That being said though, I definitely could have went with the M2 Max model, but I gotta say, there is just something so interesting about having the same amount of power that's in Apple's Mac Pro, but for a fraction of the cost and literally zero limitations. Well, I guess besides the PCIe slots, but I'll personally never use those. So having the same amount of power as the Mac Pro, just feel like I can have an endless amount of possibilities with what I can do with this computer. Anyways, let me know what you guys think of the newly updated Mac Studio, or just WWDC as a whole with the 15-inch MacBook Air, Mac Pro, all the OS updates, as well as Apple Vision Pro. I'm really interested to hear what you guys have to say in the comment section below. And of course, if you guys like this video, make sure to give it a like and share it to a friend. And if you like Apple, tech, or desk setup related content, make sure to subscribe. And until next time, peace.